Way back in the year 2000, I was just 19, young, naive, and eager to prove myself at my very first management-type job. I thought the worst thing I'd have to deal with in retail was angry customers or messy closing shifts. I never imagined I'd end up standing between a beloved mentor and a snake in disguise. Someone who tried to destroy her reputation while stealing thousands right under our noses. And by pure accident, I became the one who caught him. Before I dive in, if you love hearing true stories where justice finally catches up with the guilty, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe. I post new tales of revenge, betrayal, and sweet payback every week. And trust me, you don't want to miss the next one. I still remember the smell of that little picture framing shop. Fresh wood, mat board, and that faint whiff of industrial glue that clung to the counters no matter how many times we wiped them down. It wasn't glamorous, not by any stretch. But for me, it was freedom. My first taste of responsibility, independence, and the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I was stepping into adulthood. At 19, I was what you might call a golden retriever in human form, eager to please, always wagging my metaphorical tail and endlessly chatty. Customers didn't scare me. Annoyed managers didn't faze me. I just wanted to do a good job and feel useful. Our management team back then was small but solid. There was Jenny, our store manager, Nick, the assistant manager, and then me, the third key. That title always made me laugh. It sounded so official, but in reality, it just meant I was trusted enough to open and close the store, and on rare occasions act as manager on duty. But if Jenny or Nick was around, I was just another pair of hands on the floor. Jenny, though. She was the glue. Everyone loved her. Middle-aged, wise, and with that kind of presence that made you feel safe just being around her. She'd been through the ringer in life, but she had this way of spinning her hardships into hilarious stories, often about the wild 70s she'd survived. She baked cookies for us, checked in when we were down, and somehow always knew when to step in with a word of encouragement. She wasn't just a manager. She was our shop mom. I adored her. Nick was the opposite. College kid, good at his job, but with zero ambition to climb the ladder. He clocked in, did what he had to, and clocked out. Nothing wrong with that. But it meant when Jenny decided to leave, part health, part wanting to focus on her art, there was no natural replacement. Corporate swooped in, as they always do, with their own idea of a solution. And that solution came in the form of Steve. Oh, Steve, he was massive. A tall, broad white guy who dressed like he had raided Bill Cosby's closet in the peak of the 80s. Loud sweaters in Arizona's scorching heat. Mismatched patterns that made your eyes hurt if you looked at him too long. At first, I tried to chalk it up to quirky fashion sense. After all, everyone deserves to express themselves, right? But Steve's weirdness didn't stop at his wardrobe. When he arrived as a manager in training, my role meant I had to help show him the ropes. Normally, I'd be thrilled. I loved teaching, loved chatting, loved making people feel welcome. But Steve wasn't having it. He barely spoke. When he did, it was usually to brag about how great he'd been at his last job, or to complain about how little retail managers got paid. That wasn't the worst part. Though, the worst part was the staring. Whenever I was on shift with him, he'd sit in the office chair, fold his hands, and just watch me. Not in a casual, I'm paying attention way. In a way that made my skin crawl. I'd be matting a frame, answering the phone, helping customers, and I could feel his eyes drilling into the back of my neck. I'd force myself to be cheerful, trying to believe he was just socially awkward, maybe shy, maybe nervous about being in a new place. But deep down, it unsettled me. One Saturday, things escalated. Jenny called me at home. She sounded exhausted, her voice weak and trembling, and she asked if I could come cover her shift. Without hesitation, I said yes. That was Jenny. If she needed me, I'd be there. I got to the shop and immediately saw how pale she was, how much pain she was in. She thanked me, smiled weakly, and left me in charge. I closed that night, then worked Sunday, then Monday. 3 straight days, no problem. But that Monday, something happened that would change everything. Our district manager showed up. Let's call him Mark. He was one of those guys who could walk into a room and immediately command attention. Sharp suit, sharp haircut, sharp eyes that missed nothing. He came into the back while I was manager on duty and asked casually how Steve was doing. Now here's the thing. I was 19. I didn't know about office politics. I didn't know that sometimes you keep your mouth shut, even when you want to be honest. I just told him the truth. I explained that Steve wasn't really engaging, that he tended to just sit around or wander the floor without being helpful. I even gave a specific example. Saturday night, when Jenny had left sick, Steve had barely done anything. Mark's reaction startled me. His eyebrows shot up, but not at what I said about Steve. No. He looked shocked that Jenny hadn't been in the store after 3 p.m. that day. Something about the way he froze told me I'd just revealed something important. And oh boy, I had no idea how important it really was. The moment Mark's eyes flicked up at me, I knew something was off. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening, and for a split second I thought I'd gotten Jenny in trouble. My stomach dropped. The last thing I wanted was to make her life harder, especially knowing how much she'd been struggling with her health lately. "Wait," he said slowly, measuring his words. "You're saying Jenny wasn't in the store after 3 o'clock? I nodded, suddenly nervous. Right, she wasn't feeling well. She called me, and I came in to close for her. Steve was here, but honestly, he didn't do much. Mark rubbed his temples. He didn't look angry, not exactly. More troubled, like a puzzle piece had just clicked into place. But it revealed a picture he didn't like. "Thanks for telling me," he said finally, standing up. "Don't mention this conversation to anyone yet, all right?" That was the moment the unease began, a seed planted deep in my gut. Because when a district manager tells a 19-year-old kid not to say anything, you know something serious is brewing. Over the next week, I started noticing little things, tiny oddities I'd brushed off before but couldn't ignore now. Customers coming in with receipts, asking for refunds in cash. It wasn't unusual to do a refund here and there, but suddenly it felt like every other transaction was one. One man in particular sticks out in my memory, middle-aged, sweaty, clearly in a hurry. He slapped a receipt on the counter and said, "I need this refunded. Now." I scanned the slip. It was a credit card purchase, large, hundreds of dollars. Policy was simple. Refunds went back to the card. Always. But when I explained that, he grew agitated. His voice rose. "I don't have time for that. I need the money today. The other manager always does it in cash." The words hit me like a slap. The other manager? I hesitated, my hand hovering over the register. I wanted to ask, which manager? But before I could, Steve appeared from the back, his loud sweater announcing his presence before his voice did. "Don't worry, I'll handle this," he said smoothly, brushing past me. He slid in behind the register, typed in a few codes, turned his key, and just like that, cash was in the customer's hand. I stood frozen, my throat dry. Technically, it was allowed under certain circumstances. But the way he did it, quick, almost practiced, made my skin prickle. The customer left smiling. Steve winked at me. Sometimes you just gotta bend the rules to keep people happy. But it didn't feel like keeping people happy. It felt like something else. Something wrong. Then came the whispers. Retail is like high school. Word spreads fast, even when you don't want it to. Employees started muttering about shrink. That was the fancy corporate term for inventory loss or unexplained missing money. But this wasn't about a missing picture frame or a bent mat board. This was thousands. Every day the numbers climbed. Cash returns stacked up like bricks, heavier and heavier, until they couldn't be ignored. And all the evidence pointed to Jenny. Her register code was on the transactions. Her key was the one being used. On paper, it looked like our sweet, cookie baking shop mom had decided to rob the place blind before bowing out. The thought made me sick. I remember lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling of my tiny apartment. My brain kept replaying every moment with her. The times she'd brought in brownies. The way she always asked how school was going. The time she told me not to let anyone walk all over me, because kindness was a gift, not a weakness. Could someone like that really be stealing thousands from the company? I didn't want to believe it, but the numbers didn't lie, did they? The turning point came when Mark called me into the office one afternoon. He shut the door, leaned against the desk, and fixed me with that same sharp stare. "I need you to be honest with me," he said. You told me Jenny left early that Saturday, right? Yeah, I said carefully. She called me around 3. I came in and closed. Mark pulled out a sheet of paper. It was a printout of a transaction log. He pointed to one line. 750 returned at 7:12 p.m. Cash. Jenny's code. My stomach twisted. But she wasn't here, I whispered. Mark nodded. Exactly, I blinked. Wait, you mean... Someone else was using her code. He finished for me. The realization hit me like a freight train. Of course, Steve didn't have his own code yet. Jenny, being the trusting mentor she was, had given him hers so he could train. It was supposed to be temporary, just until corporate fixed the glitch. But Steve, he'd been using it, and in doing so, he was framing her. I felt cold all over. My hands shook as I gripped the arms of the office chair. She doesn't even know, I said. She thinks she's helping him. Mark nodded grimly. That's why I needed to hear it from you. Because if you hadn't told me, we might have let this whole thing fall on Jenny. That was the night I realized how close she'd come to losing everything. Her job, her reputation, maybe even facing criminal charges for something she didn't do. And me? I'd almost stayed silent. That guilt burned. After that, things moved quickly behind the scenes. Corporate pulled old schedules, comparing them against transaction logs. What they found was damning. Half the returns had been processed on days Jenny wasn't even in the building. Days she'd been homesick or off entirely. The picture was becoming clear. Steve was using other people's codes. First Jenny's, then anyone else's he could get his hands on, to siphon money out of the registers. The only problem? Our store's surveillance system was outdated, grainy, barely better than a VHS tape. It wasn't enough to nail him with proof. So corporate hatched a plan. They transferred Steve to a sister store in a nearby city. On the surface, it looked like part of his training rotation. He was thrilled. Less driving for him, more experience. But in reality, that store had a brand new surveillance setup. Cameras sharp enough to catch every flick of a wrist, every movement at the register. Steve walked straight into a trap. Meanwhile, back at our store, tension was high. Jenny looked worse by the day, the stress weighing on her. Nick kept his head down, avoiding the drama. And me? I felt like I was carrying a secret so heavy it bent my spine. I couldn't tell anyone, not even Jenny, that I'd accidentally exposed the truth. Not until the hammer dropped, and drop it did. Word came down one afternoon like a thunderclap. Steve had been caught on camera at the sister store. Not just processing fake returns, flat out pulling cash from the till, and when he showed up for work one day, expecting another easy shift of pretending to be a big shot, the district manager and 2 sheriff's detectives were waiting in the office. They perp-walked him out in handcuffs. I wasn't there to see it. God, how I wish I had been, to watch that smug creep get marched through the store, every customer and employee staring. But even hearing about it secondhand sent a rush of satisfaction through me. Steve was done. Jenny, though. Jenny was shaken. Too shaken. Even though her name had been cleared, the stress of almost being blamed had taken its toll. Within weeks, she decided enough was enough. She left, focusing on her art and her health. Our little family fell apart. Nick and I did our best, splitting duties, picking up the slack. Corporate sent in temps, then finally a new manager. He wasn't terrible, but he wasn't Jenny either. And though justice had been served, the aftermath lingered. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't just vanish when the villain is gone. The scars it leaves behind stay etched into the walls, the routines, the memories. I'd seen how close we came to losing someone good. And I'd learned something about myself too, that sometimes revenge doesn't come from careful planning. Sometimes it comes from a slip of the tongue, an offhand remark, the kind of naive honesty only a 19-year-old golden retriever could offer. And sometimes, that's enough to take down a thief. The night after Mark showed me the transaction log, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily overhead, and all I could think about was Jenny. Her warm laugh, her hands dusted with flour from baking, the way she'd lean over my framing projects and point out tiny mistakes with a smile. Never criticism, And then, overtop all those memories, I saw the printout in Mark's hand, Jenny's name, Jenny's code, attached to transactions she never made. I tossed and turned, my chest tight. My brain kept looping the same thought. If I hadn't said anything, she'd already be ruined. That guilt ate at me, because the truth was, I hadn't told Mark the story to protect Jenny. I hadn't even realized that's what I was doing. I'd just been my usual chatty self, rambling about how Steve had been useless that Saturday, and by dumb luck. I'd saved her, but what if I hadn't? What if I'd just kept my mouth shut? I thought about her walking into the store one morning, being pulled aside, accused, humiliated. I thought about her trying to defend herself, only to realize the paper trail pointed straight at her. And worse, what if they pressed charges? What if she'd been arrested? The image of Jenny in handcuffs made me sick. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about catching Steve. This was about justice. About making sure no one like him could ever pull something like this again. The next day at work, Jenny was quiet. She shuffled papers in the office, trying to look busy, but I could see it in her face. The exhaustion, the worry. I knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Hey, you okay?" She looked up, forced a smile. "Oh, you know me, just the usual aches and pains." But I wasn't buying it. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. "Jenny, you'd tell me if something was wrong, right?" Her smile faltered. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then she shook her head and muttered, "Corporate's breathing down my neck about all this shrink. I swear I've never seen numbers like this. I keep checking the till myself, trying to figure out where it's going." My stomach twisted. She didn't even realize she was the one under suspicion, I wanted to tell her. God, I wanted to blurt out everything. That Steve was the one stealing, that Mark was onto him, that she wasn't alone. But Mark's voice echoed in my head. "Don't mention this conversation to anyone yet." So I swallowed the truth and said softly, "If anyone can figure it out, it's you." It felt like a lie. Meanwhile, Steve was thriving. He strutted through the store like he owned the place, sweaters brighter than ever, his smug grin plastered across his face. He'd taken to bragging even more, dropping hints about how he was practically running the show at the sister store during his training rotation. I watched him from behind the counter one afternoon as he leaned against a display, chatting up a customer. He laughed too loud, his voice booming, and I caught the way his hand lingered near the register drawer whenever he was behind the counter. Every fiber of my being wanted to scream, "I know what you're doing." I know it's you, but I couldn't. Not yet, because Mark had a plan. A week later, I got pulled aside again. Mark was in the office, leaning over a set of papers. He waved me in, shut the door, and dropped his voice. "Okay," he said. "We've confirmed it. It's Steve." My heart hammered. "You're sure?" He nodded. "Schedules, transaction logs, the timing, it all lines up. But that's not enough for corporate. They want hard proof, video evidence, something irrefutable. That's why you sent him to the other store," I realized. Mark smiled thinly. "Exactly. Their surveillance system is top of the line. If he tries the same trick there, and he will, we'll catch him red-handed." The thought filled me with both relief and rage. Relief that Jenny would finally be cleared. Rage that Steve was still walking free, still smirking, still daring to act like he was untouchable. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant. "Just keep your head down," Mark said. "Don't tip him off. He thinks this is a promotion, a chance to prove himself. Let him keep thinking that," I nodded. But inside, my blood boiled, because keeping quiet meant watching Jenny continue to suffer. The following days were torture. Jenny grew paler. Her shoulders slumped under the invisible weight pressing down on her. Every time a new suspicious return popped up in the logs, I saw the way her eyes flickered with panic. She blamed herself for not catching it, not realizing she was the one being framed. One night, I stayed late, helping her close. The store was quiet, the last customer long gone, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. She sank into the office chair, rubbing her temples. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she whispered. I froze, my throat tight. "What do you mean?" She let out a bitter laugh. "This job, The stress, the pressure. It's eating me alive. I thought I could make it until retirement, but... She trailed off, shaking her head. I wanted to reach across the desk, to tell her to hang on just a little longer. That the storm was almost over. That Steve's days were numbered. But all I could do was sit there, clenching my fists, praying the trap would spring soon. And then, one morning, it happened. I was on shift when the phone rang. Mark's voice crackled through the receiver. We got him. My heart leapt. What? Steve, he did it. Clear as day on camera, using another employee's code, pulling cash from the till. We've got everything we need. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles went white. A rush of triumph surged through me, hot and electric. What happens now? Mark's tone turned cold. Now we wait for him to show up. He has a shift tomorrow at the sister store. The detectives will be there. He won't see it coming. I hung up the phone, my hands trembling. The wait for tomorrow felt endless. I imagined it over and over. The moment Steve would walk in, expecting another day of easy theft, only to find law enforcement waiting. I pictured the shock on his face, the way his fake confidence would crumble, and I pictured Jenny, finally free of suspicion, finally vindicated. For the first time in weeks, I slept soundly. The next day, I was practically buzzing with anticipation. Every hour dragged, my mind fixed on what was happening across town. By mid-afternoon, the news reached us. Steve had arrived for his shift, swaggering as usual. He'd barely made it through the door before the district manager and 2 sheriff's detectives were waiting for him. They pulled him aside into the office. And then, just like that, he was in handcuffs. The image spread like wildfire. Employees whispered. Customers stared. His loud sweaters couldn't protect him now. Steve was perp-walked out of the store, his face pale, his bravado shattered. And even though I wasn't there to see it with my own eyes, the description alone was enough to make my chest swell with satisfaction. Justice. Finally. But the victory was bittersweet. Because even as Steve was led away, Jenny was already making plans to leave. The damage had been done. The stress, the doubt, the betrayal. She pulled me aside on her last week, her eyes kind but tired. You've got a good heart, she told me. Don't let people like him change that. But don't be afraid to speak up either. You did more than you realize. I swallowed hard, fighting back tears. Because the truth was, I hadn't done it out of bravery. I hadn't planned some masterful revenge. I'd just been naive, honest, too talkative for my own good. But sometimes, that's exactly what it takes. One slip of the tongue, one unguarded moment, and the whole house of cards comes crashing down. The fallout from Steve's sudden promotion should have been predictable, but at 19 I wasn't prepared for how fast things could unravel when the wrong person got power. Almost overnight, Jenny, the woman who'd built that store, loved by employees and customers alike, went from respected manager to whispered about liability. It didn't make sense. 1 week she was mom to all of us. The next, she was public enemy number 1. And the architect behind it? None other than Steve. At first, it was subtle. Little digs slipped into conversations when Jenny wasn't around. Funny how Jenny always leaves early, huh? He'd mutter, shaking his head. Or, ever notice how things go missing on her shifts? He'd phrase it like a joke, chuckle, then move on. But those seeds, once planted, spread like wildfire in a workplace. Before long, the other part-timers were looking at Jenny sideways, wondering if maybe she wasn't the saint they thought she was. The first time I pushed back, I remember blurting out, "That's not true. Jenny's been nothing but good to this store." My voice cracked, my face flushed with embarrassment, but I didn't care. Steve just gave me that look, that smug, knowing little smirk that said, "Kid, you don't even know the game you're playing." And he was right. I didn't. It all came to a head when Jenny's health really nosedived. She'd always struggled, with migraines, But now she was calling out sick more frequently, sometimes leaving mid-shift because she physically couldn't go on. One Monday morning, I arrived to find Steve already pacing the store like he owned it. His sweater that day was a garish explosion of orange and purple, like Halloween had gotten into a fistfight with Easter. "She's out again," he said flatly, not even looking at me. "Do you know how bad this looks?" I frowned. "Jenny's sick, Steve. You've seen her. She can barely stand when she gets those migraines." He wheeled on me, eyes flashing. "You don't get it, do you? Corporate doesn't care about excuses. They care about results. And right now, the results say your precious Jenny can't handle this job." The way he said, "your precious Jenny," made my stomach turn. Like he was mocking me for caring about her. Like compassion was a weakness. That day, for the first time, I felt fear. Not of Steve's creepiness, not of his staring, but of the fact that maybe, just maybe, he was right. Not about Jenny being incompetent, God no, but about corporate not caring. Because in retail, the truth is, they usually don't. Then came the missing deposit. We'd always been meticulous about the money. End of the night, the manager on duty would count down the drawers, fill out the slips, double-check everything, and lock the deposit in the safe for the armored truck the next morning. But one Friday, the bank called Mark, our district manager. One of our deposits hadn't made it. Thousands of dollars, gone. Jenny was manager on duty that night. I'll never forget the look on her face when Mark confronted her in the office. She looked like she'd been punched in the gut. Her hands shook, her voice cracked as she swore up and down she'd done everything by the book. Steve, of course, played the loyal soldier. He sat in the corner, arms crossed, face twisted in mock concern. "It's troubling," he said slowly, like he was forcing the words out. "But, I mean, she has been really forgetful lately. Maybe it's the migraines." The daggers that shot out of Jenny's eyes could have killed him on the spot. But Mark wasn't looking at Steve. He was looking at the paperwork, and the paperwork said, "Deposit missing, Jenny responsible." I wanted to scream. I wanted to jump in, tell Mark that Steve was shady, that something wasn't right, that Jenny couldn't be guilty. But what evidence did I have? None. Just a gut feeling, and the memory of Steve's eyes boring into me during shifts. From that day on, everything changed. Customers whispered about Jenny. Employees avoided her. Even Nick, who had always been her quiet supporter, seemed to shrink back, afraid to get caught in the blast radius. Steve, meanwhile, flourished. He strutted around the store like a peacock in those hideous sweaters. Suddenly the responsible one, the dependable one. He volunteered for extra shifts, stayed late, made sure Mark knew he was available whenever needed. And Jenny. She withered. Her smile was forced. Her shoulders slumped. She stopped baking cookies, stopped telling stories about the 70s, stopped laughing. Watching it happen felt like watching someone pour dirt over a living person's coffin. I hated Steve. I hated him with a white-hot fury I didn't even know I was capable of at 19. But what could I do? If I pushed too hard, I'd get fired. If I stayed quiet, Jenny would be destroyed. It felt like a no-win scenario. One night, close to closing, Jenny pulled me aside. Her voice was low, urgent. "Listen to me," she whispered. "I think someone's setting me up." I swallowed hard. "You think it's Steve, don't you?" Her eyes darted to the office door, then back to me. "I don't think. I know, but I can't prove it. Not yet." There was a long silence. The weight of what she was saying hung in the air between us. Why would he? I started, but she cut me off. Because he wants this store. And if he can make me look incompetent, or worse, dishonest, then he gets it. My heart pounded. Jenny wasn't paranoid. She wasn't crazy. She was right. Everything clicked into place. The digs, the smirks, the missing deposit. Steve wasn't just creepy. He was dangerous. And suddenly I realized something else. If Jenny knew he was framing her, and if he knew that she knew, then what would he do next? After Jenny confided in me, I couldn't look at Steve the same way again. Every smirk, every offhand comment, every time I caught him lurking in the office, it all looked sinister. And the more I noticed, the more I realized how methodical he was. He wasn't sloppy. He didn't outright accuse Jenny of anything in front of Mark. Instead, he let her reputation crumble slowly, piece by piece, until it looked like she'd done it to herself, and it was working. About 2 weeks after the missing deposit, Mark returned for a surprise visit. That alone was unusual. He usually scheduled them. This time, he just showed up, unannounced, with a clipboard and a frown. He spent hours combing through paperwork, interviewing employees one by one. When it was my turn, I sat in that cramped office chair across from him, heart hammering. "How's morale?" he asked bluntly. "Low," I admitted. "Everyone's worried about Jenny." His eyes narrowed. Worried? Or suspicious? I panicked. My 19-year-old brain scrambled for an answer that wouldn't damn her further. "I just mean, she's been sick a lot. People don't know what's going on. It's stressful." He scribbled something down. "And Steve?" I hesitated. "He's very present." That made Mark pause, pen hovering over paper. "Present?" "Yeah. Always here. Always. Watching." Mark studied me for a long moment, then just nodded and waved me out. When I left the office, Steve was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, that stupid clown sweater stretching across his chest. His eyes bored into mine, and for the first time I realized he knew. He knew I didn't trust him. Jenny on the edge things only got worse for Jenny. A second deposit went missing, and of course it had been her shift again. She begged Mark to believe her, even offered to pay the money back herself just to prove she wasn't lying. But to corporate, guilt was guilt. Mark pulled me aside after that. His voice was low, almost pitying. "She's done, kid. It's only a matter of time. Don't go down with her." I wanted to scream, to tell him Steve was orchestrating all of it. But what could I say? "Trust me, I've got a bad vibe." That wouldn't hold up in a corporate investigation. Jenny, meanwhile, looked like she was fading. She'd lost weight, her face pale and drawn. She no longer fought Steve openly. Instead, she just kept her head down, like a soldier bracing for the final blow. I hated it. Hated watching her lose piece by piece of the life she'd built here. And then, the break came. It happened late one night. I was closing with Steve, something I dreaded. The last customer had left. The lights were dimmed, and we were counting drawers in the back office. Steve excused himself to check the front. A few minutes later, I heard a metallic clink. Curious, I slipped out of the office and peeked toward the sales floor. That's when I saw it. Steve, crouched in front of the safe, sliding a thick envelope of cash from his sweater into the pocket of his pants. I froze. My brain short-circuited. This couldn't be happening. This was movie villain stuff, not real life. I must have made a noise because Steve's head whipped around. His eyes locked on mine, and for a moment the mask dropped. No smirk, no fake concern, just raw, cold fury. "What are you doing back here?" he snapped. I left my pen," I stammered, pointing vaguely at the counter. My voice cracked like a terrified kid caught sneaking cookies. He stared at me for a long, awful moment. Then slowly the smirk slid back onto his face. "Be careful, kid. You see things you're not supposed to. You might end up in trouble yourself." I swallowed hard and nodded, pretending to buy his threat. But inside I was shaking, because now I had proof. Maybe not physical proof, but I had seen it. Steve was stealing the deposits. He was framing Jenny. And if I didn't act soon, she'd go down for all of it. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind spun in circles. How could I tell Mark without looking like I was just covering for Jenny? How could I gather evidence without getting caught myself? And worse, what if Steve came after me? I replayed that moment in the store over and over, the look in his eyes when he realized I'd seen him. It wasn't just anger. It was calculation, like he was already figuring out how to use this against me. I was 19. I didn't know about whistleblower protections, didn't know about HR escalation channels. All I knew was that if I didn't do something, Jenny would lose her job, and probably her reputation. So, I made a plan. I'd watch him. Wait. And the next time he tried to pull something, I'd make sure I wasn't the only one who saw it. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I had to, because Jenny deserved better, and Steve, he deserved to burn. Sleep was a stranger to me after that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the scene like a broken record. Steve crouched at the safe, that thick envelope disappearing into his pocket, the look of pure venom when he realized I'd caught him. Every creak of my apartment made me jump. Every time my phone rang, I half expected it to be Mark calling to say corporate had discovered some irregularity under my name. Steve had made it clear. I was in his crosshairs now. But the fear, it hardened into something else. Rage. I wasn't going to let Jenny fall for his crimes, not after everything she'd given me, not after how she'd taken me under her wing. I owed her more than silence. I decided, if corporate wouldn't see the truth, I'd make them see it. The first step was timing. I started memorizing Steve's patterns. He was arrogant, cocky enough that he didn't even try to hide his schemes anymore. He loved closing shifts because it meant he was alone with the money. That's when he struck. So I volunteered for as many closing shifts with him as I could. I don't mind, I told him with a fake grin. I like the peace and quiet at night. Inside, I wanted to vomit. Next, I had to figure out how to gather proof. We didn't have cameras in our store, just that grainy one pointed at the front door. But the sister store, the one Steve rotated into sometimes, they had a newer surveillance system. I tucked that detail away. Then, I remembered something Jenny had told me months back. Every cash refund required a manager's code and a key turn. 2 layers of authentication. Steve had been using Jenny's code, but he didn't have her key, which meant my blood ran cold, which meant he'd probably stolen that too. The thought made me furious. How dare he use Jenny's trust as a weapon against her? That anger fueled me. If Steve wanted to play this game, I'd play it better. The night it happened started like any other. Steve and I were closing. He was unusually cheerful, humming tunelessly as he shuffled papers in the office. "Big weekend coming up," he said casually, glancing at me. "Got family in town. Gonna need some extra spending cash." The way he said it made my stomach flip. I knew exactly what he meant. I forced a laugh. "Lucky you," he grinned, shark-like. "Lucky me, yeah." Hours later, after the last drawer was counted, Steve told me to go finish up the closing checklist in the front while he wrapped things up. My pulse spiked. I knew what wrapping up meant, so instead of heading to the front, I lingered by the hallway. Just out of sight. Silent, and then I heard it. The faint metallic click of the safe. My heart pounded so loud I was sure he'd hear it. I crept forward just enough to peek. There he was. Steve, crouched like before, his giant frame blocking the glow of the office light. His sweater shifted as he stuffed another envelope into his pants pocket. I snapped back, adrenaline buzzing. This was it. This was the proof I needed, but I couldn't just barge in. I needed someone else, someone who would believe. And then it hit me. The sister store. Steve was scheduled to cover shifts there later in the week. If I could just nudge things in the right direction, maybe he'd slip up under the eye of their cameras. It was risky. It meant waiting while Jenny suffered. But catching him red-handed on tape? That was undeniable. I had to bide my time. Over the next few days, I pretended nothing had happened. Smiled when Steve cracked his smug little jokes, nodded when he dropped vague threats like breadcrumbs. At one point, he leaned against the counter beside me and murmured, "You're smart, kid. Smarter than you look. You keep your mouth shut and you'll go far. You start talking." He drew a finger across his throat and winked. I forced a chuckle, like he'd just told a bad joke. Inside, my stomach churned, but the act worked. Steve thought I was too scared to say anything, and that arrogance would be his undoing. When Friday rolled around, I accidentally reminded Mark that Steve preferred working at the sister store. He's always saying he gets more done there, I added with a shrug. Mark raised an eyebrow. That's so. By Sunday, the schedule was changed. Steve was covering 2 nights at the other location. Bingo. I'll never forget the call I got the following week. I was on shift with Nick when the office phone rang. He answered, then handed it to me with wide eyes. It's Mark. He wants you. My palms went clammy. Hello? Mark's voice was electric. Kid, you're not gonna believe this. We got him. I nearly dropped the phone. What? Steve. He pulled the same stunt at the other store. Cash refunds, envelope into the pocket. Only this time the whole thing's on tape. Security caught everything. The sheriff's office is involved. I sank into the nearest chair, relief flooding through me so hard my eyes stung. Jenny. She was safe. Be in tomorrow morning, Mark added. You deserve to see this. When I arrived the next day, the air in the office felt electric. Jenny was there, pale but hopeful. Nick hovered nervously by the file cabinets. Mark stood with 2 uniformed sheriff's deputies, a stack of printed surveillance photos spread across the desk. And in the center of those photos, Steve, clear as day, stealing cash. Jenny gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. Mark looked at her gently. You were right all along. I'm sorry we doubted you. For the first time in weeks, Jenny straightened her shoulders. Relief washed over her face, a lifetime's worth of weight falling away in a single moment. Then the door opened. Steve walked in, his usual swagger in place, oblivious to the ambush waiting inside. He started to grin, then froze when he saw the deputies. Steve Daniels? One officer asked, his face drained of color. What's this about? You're under arrest for theft and embezzlement. I'll never forget the sight. Steve, the self-proclaimed genius, the predator who thought he'd destroyed us all, standing there dumbstruck, as the deputies snapped handcuffs around his wrists. Jenny whispered, almost reverently, justice. As they perp-walked him out of the store, customers stared. Employees peeked from behind displays. Whispers buzzed through the air. And me? I just stood there, heart racing, trying not to grin, because the trap had finally sprung, and Steve was finished. When those cuffs clicked around Steve's wrists, it was like the entire store exhaled at once. For weeks, we'd lived under a cloud of suspicion and fear. Jenny had carried the brunt of it, but all of us had felt the tension. Every shift felt like walking on a cracked floor that could collapse at any second. And now, the villain was gone. But it wasn't over yet. The hours after Steve's arrest were chaotic. Customers whispered, employees traded theories, and the phone rang non-stop as word spread through the district. Corporate dispatched a regional HR rep to assess damages. That was corporate speak for. Figure out how much money he stole and who else might be liable. They combed through weeks of transactions, receipts, and surveillance. Each discovery painted a darker picture. Thousands upon thousands of dollars skimmed from both stores. Refund scams, direct cash pulls, manipulated deposits, all done under Jenny's code. At one point, Jenny sat in the office across from the HR rep, her hands trembling as she tried to explain. He asked for my code during training. He said corporate hadn't processed his yet. I thought I was helping. The HR rep pursed her lips. You violated policy. Jenny flinched. That's when I spoke up. Yeah, but without her trusting him, you wouldn't have caught him. He'd still be stealing. Jenny gave him enough rope to hang himself. The HR rep stared at me, annoyed by my interruption. But Mark nodded slightly. He got it. He knew Jenny had been a victim as much as the rest of us. In the days that followed, Jenny seemed lighter, relieved, but not restored. One evening after close, she pulled me aside. Sweetheart, I've made up my mind. I'm leaving. The words hit me like a punch. Leaving? But Jenny, you're innocent. Everyone knows now. She smiled softly, tiredly. I know, but innocence doesn't erase the stress. The stares, the whispers. My health's been slipping, and this job, it's not worth my peace anymore. I wanted to argue, to beg her to stay, but I saw the resolve in her eyes. She wasn't quitting out of defeat. She was choosing freedom. I'm going to focus on my art, she said, a spark of excitement flickering. I've already had interest from a gallery downtown. Maybe this is the push I needed. Tears burned my eyes, but I nodded. You deserve that. You deserve everything good, Jenny. She hugged me tight. So do you. And don't you forget it. That was Jenny. Even in her goodbye, she was still lifting me up. After Jenny left, Nick and I became the makeshift leadership team. He handled most closings, I did most openings. We were a mismatched pair. Him laid back and half distracted by college, me eager but green. But somehow, we made it work. Corporate parachuted in temporary managers here and there, but nothing stuck for long. The store limped along until they finally hired a permanent manager months later. He was fine. Decent, competent, but he wasn't Jenny. And he sure as hell wasn't Steve. Thank God. As for Steve, word spread quickly that he'd been charged with multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud. The surveillance footage from the sister store was airtight. He'd tried to bluff, claiming it was all a training exercise gone wrong, but the deputies didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. I never saw him again. But I heard enough. The trial was swift. He was ordered to pay restitution, though everyone knew he'd never cover the full amount. And he served time. The genius who thought he could outsmart everyone ended up with nothing but a record and a ruined reputation. Justice. Looking back, it's strange. I was only 19. Just a kid, really. I didn't know how to play corporate politics. I didn't have evidence training or HR experience or any of the tools adults are supposed to use to fight workplace corruption. All I had was my gut, my loyalty to Jenny, and a stubborn refusal to let the bad guy win. And somehow that was enough. But here's the thing I've carried with me ever since. Evil rarely looks like a monster. Sometimes it looks like a smiling coworker in a loud sweater. Sometimes it hides behind charm and fake authority. And sometimes it only gets caught because one scared 19-year-old refuses to stay quiet. Years later, I ran into Jenny downtown at an art fair. She looked radiant, healthier than I'd ever seen her. Her booth was filled with vibrant canvases, her name proudly displayed. She hugged me like no time had passed. See, she said, gesturing to her art. Best decision I ever made. I smiled, proud beyond words. Jenny wasn't just my manager. She was my mentor, my shop mom, the one who taught me that kindness and strength aren't opposites. They're partners. And because of her, I learned that standing up for what's right, even when it's terrifying, is worth it. Steve thought he'd written the ending of our story. He thought Jenny would leave in disgrace. Corporate would cover his tracks, and he'd move on richer and untouchable. But instead, he left in handcuffs. And Jenny? She left on her own terms. That's the difference between villains and survivors. Villains fall, survivors rise, and I'll carry that lesson with me for the rest of my life. And that was how it ended. Not with Jenny in disgrace. Not with Steve laughing all the way to the bank. But with the truth out, the villain exposed, and the survivor walking away stronger than ever. I think about it sometimes, late at night. How close Steve came to getting away with everything. How a little more fear, a little more silence, and maybe no one would have ever spoken up. But that's the thing about life, isn't it? Villains count on silence. They thrive in the shadows, feeding on fear, hoping everyone stays quiet just long enough for them to win. And sometimes, all it takes is one voice saying, "No, not this time." Jenny said no by finally trusting herself enough to walk away. Nick said no by calling the cops when it mattered most. And me? I said no by standing by her side, even when it felt like I was fighting a giant with nothing but words. And together, that was enough. Now I know some people might hear this story and say, that's not revenge. That's just justice. But here's the truth I've learned. Revenge doesn't always look like fire and fury. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like proof. Sometimes it looks like waiting just long enough for the guilty to trip over their own lies. Steve thought he was untouchable. But in the end, the quiet, overlooked ones, Jenny, me, even Nick, were the ones who brought him down. That's the sweetest revenge there is, not lowering yourself to the villain's level, but raising the truth high enough that their lies can't survive under it. And maybe you've lived something like this, too. Maybe not with stolen money or corporate cover-ups, but with someone who underestimated you. Someone who thought they could step on you, silence you, take what was yours and walk away laughing. If you've ever been there, if you've ever stared down your own Steve, then you already know how good it feels when the tables finally turn. And if you haven't, oh, trust me, one day you will, because life always throws a Steve your way sooner or later. And when that day comes, remember Jenny. Remember that villains aren't as smart as they think they are. Remember that kindness isn't weakness. And remember, your silence is the only weapon they've got. Don't give it to them. So now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had your own Steve? A boss, a coworker, maybe even a neighbor or family member who thought they could get away with something? Until life caught up with them? Drop your story in the comments below. Trust me, I read them. And not only does it help this community grow, it reminds all of us that none of us are fighting these battles alone. And hey, if this story hit home, if you felt that little spark of satisfaction when Steve left in handcuffs, then go ahead and hit that like button. It lets me know you're with me. And if you don't want to miss the next story, the next tale of someone who thought they could play dirty and win, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Because we've got plenty more where this came from. This isn't just a channel. It's a family of people who know that revenge doesn't always have to be ugly. Sometimes it can be poetic. Steve lost his job. He lost his reputation. He lost his freedom, Jenny. She walked away with her dignity intact, her name cleared, and a brand new life blooming with color. And me? I walked away with a lesson I'll never forget. Villains fall. Survivors rise, and that is the best revenge of all.